So far, everything we've created has gone into a rectangular frame, but there are other options. Let's take a look. For starters, let's go down here to the toolbar and look at the rectangular frame tool. Again, tools with this small black arrow next to it indicate hidden tools. To reveal those other tools, click and hold, and you'll see the other options. For example, in addition to rectangle, there's also an ellipse frame tool and a polygon frame tool. Now we'll look at these in a minute, but let's just cover some basics of creating frames inside of InDesign. You can always just click and drag to create a frame. Now I'll undo that, and this time when I click and drag, let's hold the Shift key. That will constrain that shape to a square. Instead of a rectangle, it's constrained to a square. Undo that, Control Z on Windows, Command Z on the Mac, and this time we'll use yet another keyboard shortcut. That is the Alt key on Windows or the Option key on the Mac. When I hold down that keyboard modifier as I create the shape draws from the center instead of the top left corner. Now I can combine Shift and Alt on Windows or Shift and Option on the Mac, and that will create a square from the center. So just some basic geometry options. Go ahead and delete that, and we can do similar things with the ellipse tool. For example, if I click and drag, I can make any ellipse shape I want. When I hold Shift, it constrains to a circle. And when I hold Shift Alt on Windows or Shift Option on the Mac, it draws a circle from the center. So go ahead, delete that shape again, just hit the delete key on your keyboard, and now let's look at the polygon tool. So the polygon tool is controlled by your arrow keys. So go ahead and click and drag out. I'm not sure if you'll have the exact same number of sides that I do, but that can be changed on the fly. To decrease the number of sides, continue to hold down your mouse button and use the down arrow key. Obviously, the least number of sides we can have is a triangle, and we can go up from there. Now let's bring it down to about 5 or 6 sides, and now let's play with the left and the right arrow keys. So go ahead and first press the right arrow key, and you'll see that we're actually bringing in the centers of the sides, creating a star shape. Now if I combine that with the up and down arrow keys, I can create all sorts of stars and shapes, and that's flexible as I continue to hold my mouse down and move around the screen. If I want that to be a perfectly proportioned star, again I'll hold the Shift key and that will constrain the proportions. So there's kind of an irregular frame, and inside that frame, remember, you can put anything you want. You can put a vector image, a raster image like a Photoshop document, or even a Word document. Now let's go ahead, delete that shape again, and revert back to the rectangle frame tool, because there are a couple of other ways to create shapes. You can click and drag, but you can also just click. The advantage to this approach is if you want to create a frame with very precise measurements. For example, you want a frame that's 2 inches by 1.65 inches. You can type in those values, click OK, and you'll get exactly the right size. If you need to customize that later, of course you can come up here to the control panel. You can change the position, the size, the scale, the rotation, and so on. Now in addition to the frame tools, you also have the pen tool, which you can use to create irregular frames with Bezier curves. And you also have the pencil tool. This is a little bit more free form. Basically, if you can click and draw, you can create a frame. Now those aren't award-winning frames, but you get the idea. You can spend some time fine-tuning your skills with these features in InDesign and create virtually any shape you want. That said, sometimes you require a little bit more creativity. Maybe there's other ways to create those shapes. So with that in mind, let's delete these couple of shapes here. Select this one on the right, just press the delete key. And for a moment, I'm just going to jump over to Adobe Illustrator. Now, if you don't have Illustrator, that's okay. You can just sit back and watch this segment. It'll only take a moment. So I'm going to press Alt-Tab or Command-Tab on the Mac to jump over to Illustrator. I'm going to create a new print document from the welcome screen. I'll accept the defaults, whatever they are. Doesn't really matter in this case. Now over here in the toolbar, instead of grabbing the rectangle tool, I'm going to grab the ellipse tool. And with the ellipse tool, I'll just draw out an ellipse. And so far, this is nothing special. We just did this inside of InDesign. Here's the difference. Illustrator gives you some very powerful vector editing features. For example, under the filter menu, we could choose filter, distort, roughen. We'll enable the live preview, move the dialog box over a little bit, and we can see that we can really go nuts with this. Maybe we want to smooth this out, make this really jaggy, and click OK. So kind of a wacky shape, but imagine creating that by hand with the pen tool in InDesign? I don't think so. Now, with this shape created, let's go ahead and copy it. Just Control-C on Windows, Command-C on the Mac, and now we're going to jump back to InDesign. So Alt-Tab or Command-Tab on the Mac, and now just Edit, Paste. Control-V on Windows or Command-V on the Mac, and there is our wacky shape. That is definitely not something I would want to draw in InDesign. Now, with that shape still active, go ahead and scale that frame. And remember, we can put any content we want inside this frame. So just a quick example, with that frame still selected, choose File, Place, and we'll navigate to the links directory inside Lesson 3 of Part 2 of your project files. At this point, I'm going to select the 05 Landscapes file. You can really select any one of these images. I think the Landscapes one works well. When you have it selected, go ahead and click Open. And here you see that photograph placed inside this very irregular shape. And if I grab the Direct Selection tool and click inside that image, click and hold for a moment, and you get Patient User mode that we talked about before, and we can see exactly how that's being cropped inside that frame. So you really do have a lot of creative control whether you're creating your frames inside of InDesign or if you're getting a little bit of extra help from Illustrator. So let's grab our Selection tool, the black arrow tool, delete this example, we're just having a little bit of fun there, and now just one other aspect to drawing shapes. Let's grab the Rectangle Frame tool, draw out a rectangle, and the beauty of InDesign is that you can always change your mind. So we have this rectangle here, we're going to go to the Object menu. All the way down here near the bottom, there's the Convert Shape command. So right now it's a rectangle. What if I want to change it to an ellipse? Do I have to redraw it and try to match the math and the geometry? Of course not. I just convert the shape to an ellipse. If I change my mind again, I can come up to Convert Shape, and maybe we'll change that into a triangle. It's a very squat little triangle, but a triangle nevertheless. In the end, if I decide, once again, maybe not a rectangle, but a rounded rectangle with curved corners, I can do that as well. So regardless of the shape you draw, you can always convert it to another shape. Now the last aspect of understanding shapes and frames in InDesign is the difference between stroke and fill. So with this object selected, we look here in the toolbar, and this red slash means that there's no stroke, no fill. So the fill is in the foreground here, the stroke is this boundary, and neither the fill nor the stroke have any swatch or color to them. So let's just select the fill swatch here. Let's come over to the swatches palette, and we'll grab this blue Pantone color. And that just filled the interior of the shape with that color. Now let's switch to swatch mode by bringing this area forward just by clicking it. And now we'll change the swatch of the stroke to black. So here you can clearly see the difference between the fill, which is the interior, and the stroke, which is the perimeter of the shape.